comfortable staying somewhere up there or midtown. I'm not a downtown girl either.
Yeah.
I'll go down to shop there, or have dinner, but I'm not really, that's not my vibe. So I guess it was a couple of years ago, my daughter, we were meeting in Manhattan. She was coming from Chicago from school, and she got this Airbnb. So it was right up the block from Bloomingdale. So of course I was thrilled because that's my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's gorgeous. I mean, Patrick, it was beautiful. It was just a one bedroom.
They
tiny,
love going.
tiny.
They love going to all the little parks, the
Exactly.
small parks. They go to those in between.
So I walk into this gorgeous apartment, and the guy, I mean, his taste level, everything was just beautiful. All of a sudden, I'm looking at all the art in the room. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is from all the same artists. What beautiful artwork. Turns out it's his artwork. He's an artist.
Okay.
The last name was Walsh. Anyway, he couldn't have been nicer to us. So now every time she goes to the city or I'm going to meet her or something, I mean, prior to this mess, we would always just call him directly.
Yeah.
And stay at his place.
Yeah, that's what Rachel and Katie do, is they do that because they go there 4 or 5 times a year. And I get his family, I think, is well off.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, you have, honestly,
yeah.
I don't
So
care how small it is. You know what that apartment's worth?
he has like 3 of them, and then he's got all his friends in the city. So if they call in, he's like, oh yeah, you could use it. I'll just go to wherever.
This guy, same thing.
Yeah.
The same thing.
He'd just go to a friend's place.
He stayed there, and he's like, you know what? It'll give me an excuse. He was going out to stay in the Hamptons.
Yeah. This is the same
It was the same.
same type thing.
Once you get into that, though, it's so, I prefer it. It's just so much more convenient, especially with a daughter that you're traveling with.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine's not. Yeah, she is somewhat. Not a normal amount of maintenance, but maybe a little bit.
My daughter is a normal amount also. She's
Not
the
overly.
nails and all of that. She could care less. But I will tell you still, you know, there's only one bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, man! You don't even know.
Good morning.
So you're going to be horrified at this. The house we live in now is a little concrete block shack, 1,325 square feet, no garage. It's got a carport. 3-bedroom, 1 bath. Me and 2 girls. We joke about it.
Oh,
We have an ODPP. Horrible. ODPP. You know what that is? We're staying in the world. Open door pooping policy. I'm the only one that doesn't take advantage of this thing. I'm so spoiled.
Oh my gosh, that's one thing. I love my daughter. I do. And she's not high maintenance. I'm more high maintenance, quite frankly, than she is. But the bathroom, if I was a floor away and we're sharing one bathroom there, let's just say it ain't easy. We can leave it at that.
Yeah, my house has 3 bathrooms in it. I need to replace the guest bathroom toilet.
I mean, we have,
I don't
thank
like
God, 3 bathrooms also in this
I
house.
wouldn't be in a house. See, it's just me and my mom. But I'm like, I just don't want to share.
We're gonna have to. Yeah, my daughter just has a lot of stuff. She's not super high maintenance, but she still buys all of it.
Yeah, my daughter too.
She goes around all the time in oversized stuff.
Yeah, my daughter does the same
T-shirts.
thing. But yeah, it's a challenge, believe me. How are you? Everything good?
Good, how are you?
Good.
I feel like I need to really catch up. I feel like I went through almost my first one. And it's like a skim, and I'm like, now I need to go back and register it all.
No, right?
Rewatch all of Megan's stuff.
Yeah, me
Because
too.
we're gonna go into this open house thing, and I gotta do a ton of them. I'm not ready yet. I need a couple more weeks.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm getting my picture taken Wednesday. I haven't done that yet.
I screwed up and I put the wrong, I put a QR code on my residence cards. And I put a dot instead of a dash. So now I gotta figure out, do I wanna go reorder cards, or do I want to scratch out the QR code, like just mark through it? Like that looks so professional. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll buy stickers, like get the QR code stickers to look over it.
Hi, how are you?
You can't readdress a QR code, so.
It's something, that's
Yeah.
annoying. I'm
Like
sorry.
like $80 for 1,000 cards.
I know, right?
Whatever. Jump change. Have you done a website or anything like that?
I'm working on that as well. I'm trying to figure out what direction I want to go in with that. So,
Yeah.
as far as naming.
Yeah, I met Corey last week. And she's got a close with Corey or something like that. So she made it work.
Yeah.
You know.
I just don't know what to do because I did a just ask him man. He's not, and
How's it going? It's going good. Hey, is there like a outgoing mailbox here?
Yeah.
Yes, it's right on the front.
Yeah, you gotta think about the.
Thing if you ask Kira, who's up there, she can set you up.
I got all my.
Yeah, awesome.
Handwritten letter.
Can't beat that. I'll be right back, guys.
Yeah, I want to build like a Facebook page, but I don't have a sphere yet to really say, oh, let's drive people to do this, yet, because I want to have at least 30 people before because you actually want people looking at it.
Correct.
I mean, I could get a lot of friends from out of town looking at it, but.
I'll tell you though, a friend of mine who just joined Berkshire Hathaway, she's from Georgia. That's what her plans are. That's what she's, that's her sphere of
Yeah,
influence.
yeah,
And she's got enough customers coming in today to look at homes.
it's awesome.
Yeah, so I think like
So,
relocate, yeah.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that have friends, like relatives here, our coworkers and friends that we work with, have relatives back in the States. And I haven't, okay, what do I ask them?
Yeah.
I've also friends, people like people in the neighborhood. Just people like that.
I live in
Yeah.
an HOA, so that makes it easy, because I know a lot of people,
Yeah.
just my neighbors.
Well, we've had a lot of drama in our neighborhood. They're like 250 houses. It's an older neighborhood in Arlington, like ranch style homes, like the big ranch style homes. And it's just basically the people who live there forever, right around the board. So we're trying to re-elect those people. So I've asked to steer that, just so I can get to know people.
Yeah. I got
I don't want to
myself.
neighborhood, because a neighborhood is not it's a, he's all beanies like, so someone I know that neighborhood. That's kind of true.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I needed that water. I rode my bike last night. It's a little too late because I was trying to avoid the heat. Yeah.
88 degrees right now.
Okay. How's it going, everybody? Make sure they're there too. We've got Kevin and Mandy, Greg, and Miles. So good to go. Okay. Yeah, I rode my bike. So my wife, they have these bikes, they're electric assist. They have a motor. You've probably seen people cruising on those.
Yes, yes.
Oh, I bought one for my wife so she could go with me on my rides, but it made her so far faster than me. And I went and rode last night. We left our house at 6, went down to Guana. We're there and on our bikes at 6:30. And we rode, 21 miles in an hour and 25 minutes or something. And the speed she can hold on that thing versus what I can do is ridiculous. I mean, I was pedaling at 2 o'clock in the morning still. I was in agony. So I'm super dehydrated. I'll be sucking on this water jug all day long. So, hey, Paige, how are you? She's just joined. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. There's going to be a couple of things that I'm going to show you, a few things that we're going to go over here. From my point of view, and it's pretty much, I like to think, correct. From easiest to hardest things in real estate, the easiest thing is writing a contract and getting it accepted. That's way easier than getting a buyer or a seller. So that's that's a hard thing to do. Getting it to close once you get a fully executed contract is probably the hardest thing to do. And it's the most underappreciated skill that there is. I can tell you, you'll be stunned because it'll always feel like here's the joke. What'll happen is you'll go to write a contract and you'll contact me and we'll talk about, a little more about that process. We did it last Wednesday. I'll send you a form. It's a checklist, to make sure that you do all the forms right and everything. You'll do all the forms right. You'll write the contract. There'll be a little negotiation back and forth. It'll get you a little bit worked up. And then you'll get a fully executed contract. And then you'll call me and go, awesome, thanks so much. What I would have people do, call me and go, awesome, thanks so much for your help, as if they just got paid. And in reality, that's just the beginning of your job. The hard part is about to start. Contract to close, like I said, that's where the rubber meets the road. So a couple forms I want to review with you guys today. I'm going to do the compliance checklist first. So on our website, let's see if it'll let me do it. On our website, under downloads, whether you're doing a buyer transaction or a seller transaction, I broke them into two separate checklists down here that you can download. So they're there and available for you. I haven't opened it yet, so I'll open one to show you. So the first time you go to write a contract, what's going to happen is you're going to contact me and say, hey, you'll probably be somewhat panic stricken. Hey, I have somebody that wants to write an offer on 123 Main Street. And what I'll do is I'll say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you a checklist and I'm going to mark the things that you need in order to sell 123 Main Street. So, the items up here at the top, you're basically required to account for in some way, shape, or form. So that by the end of the transaction, you're going to have a fully executed purchase and sales agreement. You have to have that really at the beginning of the transaction. So what I end up doing is I go in and I'll mark that with an X and say, okay, we need that. Seller's property disclosure. We either need the seller's property disclosure or there's a no property disclosure addendum. We looked at that last week. The green sheet or the sheet you get paid on, we don't need that till the end, so I won't mark that. You won't have a binder yet, so I won't mark that we need verification of binder yet. We won't need the MLS sheet or the tax record at this point because we don't have a fully executed. All offers sent and received regardless of acceptance. That turns out to be pretty easy if you use DocuSign. Everything ends up in DocuSign by default. All available correspondence. I had that discussion with you guys last Wednesday. Essentially, all you need to do, if you're one of those people that needs to have a clear email box, you want to create a folder for each transaction. And then just move stuff into that folder. You'll never delete that stuff, at least not for 7 years, because it can come back to you later. And then the KW disclosure to buyer is going to be required. These things will be things that you'll need at the beginning. You may need an escalatory addendum. So if you called me and said it looks like it's a multiple offer situation, we'd go through and talk about that. We're going to talk about that form in a minute, just because so many transactions have that right now. The lead-based paint disclosure, if it was built prior to 1978, you'll need that. If it's a condo, you'll need a condo rider. If it's an HOA, in an HOA, you'll need an HOA disclosure. So some of these things you may need. And then there's another list of things that you may need, you know. This is the listing. It says buyer side. Okay. So you may need some of these other ones, and I'll help you walk through that. So essentially what will happen is I'll go in and mark the things that you're going to need to make sure that you get this thing fully executed. Because that's the key, is having a fully executed contract that we can hold both the buyer and the seller to. So that's the form that we use to do that. There's a listing side and a buyer side. So generally speaking, after I create that on the buyer side, I use it with the buyer. So we'll talk about that, but we just want to make sure that we get all that documentation. We'll talk about estimated closing costs. This escalatory addendum, this is how we win in a multiple offer situation. Let me find the little booger here. And I'll show you, I'm going to go through one to show you the files. All this stuff's in command. Yeah. Let's see if we have it here. Huh, I'm surprised. Okay, give me a second. I'll pull it up over here. Not that one. I need the other one. Okay, so on 4/20, like I said, when we went over the contract, on April 20th, April of 2020, they made a bunch of adjustments to our forms and a bunch of adjustments to the contract. This form was changed dramatically. So I'm going to read this out to you and explain sort of what we're getting at. Because like I said, this thing's going to come up probably at least 25% of the time that you write an offer in the current market. So escalatory addendum. This addendum is made by the undersigned buyer and seller and is incorporated into, made a part of the purchase and sales agreement between the buyer and seller, and pertains to the following property. So you put the address in. Buyer and seller agree that the amendment is modified as the agreement is modified as follows. If prior to the full execution of the agreement, seller receives any competitive bona fide offers to purchase the property from which seller would receive higher net proceeds from the sale, the buyer agrees that the purchase price shall automatically be increased. A common number that I would put there is either $500 or $1,000. More than any other competitive bona fide offers, not to exceed a maximum price of, and we'll talk about what you would put in there and how you come up with that number. Prior to amending the agreement to reflect the higher purchase price, seller shall provide buyer or buyer's broker with a copy of the other competitive bona fide offers with the names of the buyers deleted. If any bona fide competitive offer includes an escalatory addendum, the automatic increase herein will be applied to the maximum escalated price of the best competing escalatory addendum, not to exceed the maximum price. Buyer and seller agree to initial revised parts of the agreement as to the purchase price financing amounts and balance due at closing at the request of the other party. The additional amounts to be paid by buyer shall be added to the buyer's financing, added to the balance due at closing, or a combination of the addition of buyer's financing and the balance due at closing, so that the loan amount shall be blank % of the revised purchase price. And you're only supposed to mark one of those, and I'll explain. All other terms and conditions of the agreement not in conflict herein shall remain unchanged and shall remain in full force and effect. Okay, so when you submit, you would have your buyer sign off on this. Here's a prime example of it. Okay. And here's how you, and this also is an example of how you win. Let me make sure I get the, oh, that's funny. Okay. So here's what I'm pulling up here. Okay. So first things first, this is a contract that I did with Maddie Malloy, who's in the program here. We've closed this transaction. So I'll show you exactly what we did. So we wrote the contract up, and initially she showed this property to her buyers, Kelsey and Ryan, they're married. She showed this property to her buyers, and at that time there were no other contracts in play. I'll put in here so you can actually see the property and see the story behind it. Let me find her. So this is 14132 Waverly Falls. Won't let me copy that. So 14132 Waverly. 14132 Waverly Falls. It was closed. So this is a transaction we worked on recently. It closed 6/25, so almost a month ago. So here's what happened. The original list price on this was $368. Nobody bought it. So a couple points I want to lay out here. It was at $368, and they kept it at $368 for, it looks like 8 days. And then they reduced it to $360. Either they weren't getting enough showings, or the feedback they got from the showings they got said that it's overpriced. So at that 8th day, they dropped it to $360, and then they went basically a little shy of 30 days, and they dropped it to $350. I can tell you what happens right away when it hits the right price: multiple offer. So she comes to me, she's new in the program and doesn't, and she's like, well, it's been on the market for 77 days or for 35, 40 days. And now my people are writing on it and it's a multiple offer. So the first thing that's going to happen when you say, my people are interested in the property, but they want to put in a low offer, I'm going to start asking you a bunch of questions. I'm going to say, how long has it been on the market? Well, it's been on the market for 40 days. When was the last price reduction? Yesterday. Yes, it's probably a multiple offer. That's 100% common. And you need to be able to explain that to your people. So this one in particular, when they put it at 350, think about it this way. And this is why when I list a property, I generally use a round number. People who have searches on Zillow, Realtor.com, somebody's website, any of those things, their search is from 300 to 350. So if this thing's listed at 355, they never even see that it's available. In fact, if it's at $350 and $100, they don't even know about it. But as soon as it hits 350, it looks like a new listing, and they get an instant update that says, you know, something works for you. So here's where the reason I do list at 350 instead of 349.9. If you're at 349.9 and somebody has a search from 300 to 350, they're going to see your property. But if they have a search from 350 to 375, they're not even going to see yours, because yours is at 349.9. See how that works? So I'm a big fan. So when you hit breaks like this, like when you hit an obvious barrier, 350, you'll run into multiple offers more than 50% of the time. So you'll come to me and go, this has been on the market for 2 months and then we went to put in an offer and all of a sudden it's multiple offer. Because the initial offer they wanted to put in was like 335. And they were the first ones to the table of doing that. So instantly I warned her, I was like, hey, they reduced this thing 2 days ago. There's a distinct possibility if they go in that low, it's not going to get accepted outright. It's going to get a counteroffer, and you're going to extend the time for somebody to sweep in and turn this into a multiple offer situation. And that's what happened. So, so it got dropped down and it turned into a multiple offer situation. And then her people are like, oh, well, you know, that sounds like crap to me. It's been on the market 40 something days and it doesn't. It's like, all right, but this is common and you have to be able to explain that scenario that I just explained to you, some version of it. Probably don't have to go into as much detail as I do. But you need to be able to say, hey, it was reduced yesterday. You're not buying this at 95 or even 97% of the purchase price, most likely. You're most likely paying 99 plus or minus 2% on this thing if it was reduced yesterday or just listed. So here's what happens. They turn in their semi-good offer. And I'll even read to you the discussion that I have with the agent, because we'll all have these discussions while you're with me at some point. And I think it's worth understanding that you're not the special snowflake when this happens to you. Okay, so Maddie, okay. Here it is, right at the beginning. Hi, Patrick, it's Maddie. Sorry to bother you late at night. My sister and her husband decided they want to make an offer on a house tomorrow. I don't see any open slots tomorrow. On the Sign Up Genius, if I send you all the paperwork tomorrow before 10 a.m., would you be able to review with me at some point? And then I said, I'll touch base with you at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. We'll take care of them then. So we ended up going back and forth and said, let's talk at 11:15. And she's like, thank you so much. I just said, hey, that's why I'm here. Anyway, you can go over the PASA earlier with me. Listing agent told me someone else is submitting an offer this morning. So that's when instantly I find out that it's multiple offer. And I was like, have you written any portion of it at this point? Yes, I'm trying to send it to you through DocuSign. I have a couple questions though. And here's what I'll generally tell you. Don't send through DocuSign, download it to a PDF and email if possible. We'll get your questions answered easy peasy. Trying to keep her calm. Okay, just emailed you the PDF. I said, give me 20 minutes. I'll touch base with you on the next steps. Just sent you a Zoom link. Hop on when you get a chance. Just join. Okay. So here's where they're screwing up. So this thing is listed at 350. They know it's a multiple offer situation. And I get from her, and for me, I'm just like 95% chance they're not getting this house when I get what I get here. Probably more like 97% this isn't going to work. We submitted, so initially they wanted to submit 340 and ask for the 3% closing cost to be paid, which is the equivalent of just a shade over 330. It's about a 330 offer. And I said, that's not gonna pan out good for you. And so she sort of toughened up a little bit with her buyers. And then she comes back to me. We submitted 345K, not asking any closing costs. Listing agent said other offer came through and he's going to send to homeowners and his guests that they will ask. So we had some conversations. What I'm going to start asking right away is, when is highest and best? When is highest and best? When do we have to submit your buyer's highest and best to this agent? So you'll see that they'll sometimes write it into, let's see if he did. It's not written into the listing anywhere. Sometimes it will be. And sometimes they'll just send you some sort of evidence. I see what happened here. So he's going to send to his homeowners and guess that they will ask for highest and best to submit a different offer. Do you just use a counter offer addendum, or what would you send? And then I had to get on her and get detailed. I was like, I need you to answer these questions for me to find out where we're at. Am I correct? So send to him an email or a text. Am I correct that we're in a multiple offer situation? So you need to know if you are. And then, oops, turn around. What time do we need to have our highest and best to you? So I need to know those two things. Otherwise you can get caught out. Then she got an email from him because I had her ask those questions. This is the email the listing agent sent out. My sister is going to talk to her husband regarding escalatory addendum. I'm meeting with them in person around 5. Is there anything I should know about emailing changes versus redoing the purchase and sales due to the time? The agent, who I'm familiar with, had sent out an email, and it says, we've received multiple offers on 14132 Waverly Falls. The sellers have instructed me to send out an email asking each party to please submit their highest and best offer. He may not have done that if I hadn't had her do all those questions. They may have just taken the other offer. They don't have to do this. Once received, the seller will be selecting one to negotiate with. So you can turn in your highest and best and then them turn around and ask for more money. It's possible. It's the market we're in. Please submit the highest and best offer by 7 p.m. tonight, 5/19/2020. In the interest of time, an email response of any changes to the purchase and sales agreement will suffice. And once agreed upon, we can amend the purchase and sales agreements with signatures. So, because every agent deals with those things separately. Sometimes you'll get screwed, but this guy's pretty decent. So she asked, is there anything I should know about emailing versus redoing the purchase and sales? I said, nope, in this case, follow the listing and agent's instructions. In other words, whatever he told you to do, do. You want to prove to be easy. You want to be easy to work with. She's like, perfect, thanks. Last question for the escalatory addendum. Let's say, and this is awesome, say the other people offered $353 and asked for 3% closing costs, and my sister and her husband offered $350 no closing costs and did addendum up to $355. How does that work with the difference in closing costs? They would like to bump their offer to $354. So I'm going to show you two things. First of all, this is what the addendum used to look like. So when she and I did that contract, we didn't know there was a new escalatory addendum. So the question she's asking about closing costs and all that stuff is legitimate. So if you read this one, which is much simpler, but doesn't pan out so good, should there be any competitive offers submitted to the above referenced property simultaneous to the presentation of this offer that are equal or greater to the buyer's offer price of $351, the buyer hereby agrees to pay $1,000 more than any other competitive offers up to a maximum price of $356. This is what we ended up submitting. Seller hereby agrees to provide buyers or buyer's representative with evidence of the other competitive offers prior to a minute. So this one's way simpler, but it didn't have all those rules of a higher net proceeds. It didn't take into closing cost. It was a problem we had for years that I was a part of. So this form used to say right here at the top, Prudential Network Realty, because me and Rachel and a couple of agents at our old company worked with an attorney to create the simplest one of these. This thing didn't exist NEFAR wide. It was only in that company. Rachel and I really did it. We brought it down here and I took their logo off here and I put this one on here. And that's when this place started using it in 2010. But it has those holes in it. It doesn't say anything about closing cost. It doesn't say all the stuff that the other one does. So they improved it. We just didn't know at that time that there was a new one. We used this one. Additionally, I would point out that they said they want to do an offer of $351 and that they agree to pay $1,000 more up to $356. And if you remember what she sent me, she said they would like to bump their offer to $354. How do you go from $350 to $351 to $354 to $356? Here's how it happens. And this is how you turn out not to be the problem. So her buyers say, you know, we're willing to pay $351, we'll pay $1,000 up to $356. But initially they say $354. You know what you need to ask those buyers right that second? Let me make sure we're clear on this. If somebody buys it at $355, you're not going to regret giving up the house. You know what the answer is? Oh no, I'd pay the $355. Okay, then we need to talk about where the question stops, that you're okay losing it. So if somebody pays $355, you would be willing to pay that. Okay, so what if $356? What if you paid $356? Would you prefer to have it or not have it? Yes. What about $357? No, I think we're going to let it go. Okay, $356 is the number you put in this blank. And here's the cool part. They ended up, if you look at the MLS, purchasing this house for $351. See how that works? So we didn't even have to use the escalatory addendum. Because they have to send you all the evidence of that. That's a good way to just take your license and feed it through a shredder. Yeah, like if you, like those 7 things as a transaction broker that are required, one is dealing honestly and fairly. They may not allow these in Arkansas. Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing about it, this thing does not mean that you can't choose somebody else. So like I could take an offer here. This person could have taken an offer at $345 that was cash closing in 2 weeks. Just because your number is higher doesn't mean that you win necessarily. There are other, just like the people sent you a letter, there were, you know, that said, we love the house. You could ask, I guarantee you that's, yeah, you could have asked for more. That I would be surprised if there was a, yeah, now typically you don't want to do that because the other people will see what you're doing and that you're being you're not being honest and fair, and they're going to ditch you. So what you're, in theory, if it were here and it was the same situation and you and I were working on it, I would say what we need to do is send out a multiple offer notice and say we need highest and best by 7 p.m. tomorrow, Tuesday, July 21st. And that'll give everybody, puts everybody on equal ground and lets them make a decision. Less than 48 hours. So the first thing I'm gonna ask is if you have a listing and they send you an offer, that's never an emergency. because the first thing I'm going to ask is, when do they want a response by? So anybody who's anybody is going to give you at least 24 hours for a response. So like you and I would have the rest of today and tonight to sort it out and communicate everything with the seller, and then respond tomorrow if it was an individual offer. If it's multiple offer, what you do is just buy some more time. There's a form. It's called notice of multiple offers. And again, it won't be an emergency. You and I will be able to, listings are so much easier. They're way less stressful, not nearly as often an emergency, but in the current market, extremely difficult to come by. So what we would do at that point is submit, we'd probably put in the private remarks section of the MLS down here. We'd probably write in multiple offers. Please submit your offer by 7/21/2020. And we may put a multiple offer disclosure or form under the document section. And then we'll probably just shoot out an email or a text letting people know. One thing not to do is send out an email saying we have multiple offers and put all the agents' emails in the to part. One of our experienced agents up there on the wall did that last week, like a friggin' moron. Don't do that, yeah, because you don't want any of those people to start talking on the sides. So so that's how you use that form. If somebody says, you know, it's listed at 350, first of all, 9 times out of 10, they're going to need to go in at list price if it's a situation like this. If you go in at 345, then do an escalatory addendum. The people are going to see that you're greedy and cheapy. Another thing that you guys all have to know is each $1,000. Do you know how much each $1,000 on your mortgage makes your house payment go up? So if you put an extra $1,000, so if you buy it for $351 instead of $350, it costs you about $4 more a month. Cost almost nothing. So $5,000 is going to raise your mortgage payment $20. Don't lose because you didn't educate the buyer to that fact, or they have a lender that doesn't understand that. So $10,000 is going to raise their mortgage payment $40 a month, approximately. Don't fall, because that's where people get nitpicky. There's, you know, $1,000 is a huge amount of money. $4 a month is nothing. So don't lose over that. I'll show you just a quick example of how you can see that. So if you go into like Google and type amortization, I'm a big fan of one on here in particular. It's this one. It says brettwhistle.net. This one's real simple to read. So an example of that would be, you could put $100,000 in here. So let's say that somebody's borrowing $100,000 at 4%. That's high interest rate right now. You're getting less than 4%. They're doing 12 payments a year for 360 payments. That's 30-year mortgage. And you do the show amortization. Click that button at 4%. So your payment amount is $477.42, right? If I add $1,000 to that, so I'm going to go from $477.42 to $482. So it's $5, a little less than $5 more than $4 at 4%. Do you see how that works? So that $1,000 means nothing in the greater scheme of things in a situation of a house, particularly when you have a mortgage. It gets a little more shaky when it's cash, but no big deal. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood that form so that you're not surprised the first time that I hit you up with that. You know, when the explanation, like the fact that she and I pulled this off, won the multiple offer, and then she closed is a semi-miracle. The hard part was, and we'll get to this in a minute, these were first-time home buyers. Guess what first-time home buyers always expect from the house? They always think it's perfect. As soon as you do a home inspection, they're going to get a list as long as their arm, no matter what. And then they're going to want to ask for a whole bunch of stuff that's baloney. These people did that. After winning the multiple offer, they were wanting to ask for $2,000 toward their closing costs, ask them to fix a whole bunch of crap, one or the other, all these different things. And I was like, well, here's where you need to put on your big girl pants, and you need to go to your buyer and say, we got this thing at 351. It could have been as high as 356. We were lucky that we won and got it for 351. Our contract is as is by default. What you're asking for here doesn't make any sense, or what, you know, you have to just enlighten them to all sides. How's that going to be received on the other side? People are not very good at looking at the other side, and you got to be able to do that. So if you look at the end, they ended up taking $250 to make some repair. They were like, they give them a $250 credit to do a little bit of electrical stuff or something.
So like I had a few multiple offers, and that first offer fell through, and that second offer was still filed.
If you want to put somebody in a backup position, you can do that. I usually try to avoid I usually try to work it out with the first person in line, because by the time that nitpicky stuff comes up, you've been dealing with it. You've been under contract for 2.5 weeks, and it's going to cost you more money. You should always, we're actually going to get to that. There's something that you're going to say throughout the conversation. So communication needs to be organized. Something you're going to say early and often. And we have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell. If everybody signed off, we have a buyer that wants to buy, a seller that wants to sell. When it gets emotional, when people are fighting over baloney, God forbid somebody says it's the principle of the thing. If somebody says it's the principle of the thing, that means that they threw logic out the door, and now we're dealing on emotion, which is a dangerous place to go. As soon as they say principle, logic is gone. Screw your principles. Let's use logic to solve this issue. And then you need to maintain a cooperative environment along the way. So when I show you an example of this on a transaction I did, the email chain, you're going to see what I mean. It's the craziest, sketchiest thing you've ever seen. And I think 99 out of 100 people wouldn't have gotten it to close. And I'll show you how we got it to close. So estimated closing costs. We generally don't do estimated closing costs for buyers in the current environment. I have a form that will allow you to do it to a certain extent, but really what you want to do is put them in touch with a lender, and the lender's going to handle all the buyer's numbers, and you're probably not going to know now. When I started in real estate, you tried to do an estimated closing cost for buyers. There are a million holes in there. So the form that I use, if you go to the download section of the KWJB Future Cappers, there's an estimated closing cost form there. It's written in all caps and underlined. And I'll show you what that is and how you use it. Oops, it's not going to open. Okay, it did open. Okay. So what you'll find is there's a buyer's tab and a seller's tab on here at the bottom. For the buyers, the reason it doesn't work so good for us is because if anybody puts anything less than 20% down, there's mortgage insurance on that, and you don't know how to figure that out. So generally with buyers, we don't do the estimated closing cost. With a seller, we will. And when you hit that, because listings aren't an emergency, I'll go over that thing with you. Go over this form and we'll create this together. So those are some forms that we have. We have that escalatory addendum. It's in DocuSign. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's also a forms section here. So if you go to your menu and look for under daily functions, there's forms. I hit the thing to pin it to my taskbar. But if you go into the forms, it has a bunch of forms here. So NEFAR docs, it has this big long list of stuff. And your escalatory addendum is inside here. Here it is right here. So you can go there and download it from there if you want to. They would prefer, and I would prefer at the office that you use DocuSign, because it'll just keep all your stuff together. You don't have to worry about keeping it and all that stuff. Make sense? The compliance checklist, like I said, I'll help you create one of those, and then you'll do the documents, and then I'll review the documents, and then you'll submit, to the listing agent if you're on the buyer side, or if you're the listing agent. It's real simple. We have like 2 weeks to do your paperwork. It's real easy. And then the estimated closing costs we'll deal with if we get to it, if we need to. So a successful contract to close system is where you really earn your money and your stripes. 100%, not the time to wing it. Most agents wing it. Most agents suck at it. Or they hire somebody to do it for them, which I'm okay with. If you're not a detail person and not a tech person, you may hire it out at some point. You may hire somebody to do this. If you use our system, so Rachel and I do all our own. We've done up to 40 transactions in a year with no outside assistance by using what I'm teaching you today. Most agents can't do that. We figure we could do it without assistance up to 48. At 48, average of 4 closings a month, that's going to overwhelm Rachel by a ton. And on top of that, we're going to pull in 18 million and $400,000. We'll hire somebody to help at that point. A typical way that agents do it. So I have 2 agents on my team. One that has taken the stuff I'm teaching you today and made it better, almost to a fault. Like he's added so much to it that it sometimes brings problems that would have never come up. That's James. And then I have Kayla on our team who can't organize anything. She's ADHD. She knows it. She's insanely disorganized in every single part of her life. So they have an agreement to where he does hers and she pays him $350 on each of her transactions. The hard part for me is to watch that happen because she does about 15 transactions a year. So this comes off the top of her money. And for Rachel and I, we set up a system to where it's not hard, but we generally do 32 transactions a year. Why would I pay $11,200 for something I can do if I organize it right? And I'm a control freak, and so is Rachel. The other thing about handing it off to somebody else, we tried it 2 or 3 or 4 different times. Their close rate is not as high as ours. So if you hire this stuff out for Rachel and I, we're going to close virtually 100% of our transactions. If we hire it out, we're going to close about 80, 85. Yeah, that's knowing the story from the beginning to the end of showing the property, writing the offer, all communications with the listing agent and all that stuff. So regardless, if I were you guys, I would do at least a dozen on your own before you start hiring it out. I mean, if it turns out, if you use my thing, it's easy as heck. I mean, most of you, when we do the MREA spreadsheet, are only looking to close 12 to 18 properties a year. Men, you can do that freaking with our eyes closed. And you'll learn it at the same time. So a successful system provides you with 3 outcomes. Number 1, the transaction closes on time as expected. Surprising number of contracts don't close on time. The majority, usually, I mean, I would say 60% don't close on time. They have some sort of run over based on inspections, financing, or any billion of a number of things that come up. My example today that I'm going to show you email-wise, communication-wise, didn't close on time. Strange and valid reason. None of it was my fault, but I solved the issues, and I'll show you how. The process is smooth and painless for all parties involved. I got to tell you, that's very aspirational. There's no transaction that doesn't, we call it gremlins, that doesn't have a couple of gremlins scooting around in there that may or may not rear their ugly head. You have an opportunity to create raving fans or be viewed as a raving lunatic. So Kayla was viewed as a raving lunatic because she's asking for paperwork to be signed 2 days before closing that should have been signed at submission, just because she's disorganized and it's not her thing. She has a whole different set of gifts that make her incredible at getting customers and doing the transactions, doing that. On the other hand, her ability to process that stuff is not great. So organization and communication. I'm going to show you the contract to close checklist, and I'm going to show you how we fill that out. It's tedious, but it's the big difference between this going smoothly and not going smoothly. So our contract to close checklist looks like this. And I'm going to show you from the example of that contract I showed you a minute ago, how this came to be. So the one we did with Maddie with the $351,000. Here's the purchase and sales agreement. Like we talked about when we did the contract, she was approximately 1% for the binder. The people were doing, I guess, 3% down because it's 10.5 plus, so 13,500 was their money down, and then they're getting a loan for 337,500, and you add those up and it comes into 351. I had her call the listing agent and say, where are we going to close? So she put the binder with them. Now, a couple of things. She's doing FHA, so you need to put the same amount in here as the amount that you're making an offer for. And then here's where things get interesting. So they have to make an application within 5 days. So on her contract to close checklist, we were fully executed on 5/21. What does that mean? That means all the things that were part of the contract have been initialed and dated by all parties and delivered to the other side. So if the last thing that happened, if you remember what this agent said, he said, I'll make all the adjustments and send it over to you. You know, initially you'll get an email, then you'll get it with all adjustments. That occurred on the 21st. If that occurred on the 21st, what's the first day that you count on the contract? The 21st or 22nd? So it's the following day. So her, and what you'll see is I have the critical date. Critical date means if this isn't done by then, this is critical condition. If it isn't done by that critical date, we're screwed. And then the actual date when we did something. So on the fully executed, it's always going to be the same, 5/21 and 5/21. Then the binder deposit. So if I go back to her contract, the binder was due within 5 days. So if I go back over to her contract to close, I need to count 5 days. I highly recommend doing it on a calendar like this so you don't muck it up. So we were fully executed on Sunday, the 21st. So 5 days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see we put in the binder at 5/26. In addition to that, the buyer's loan applied for, we used the 5 days here. So application within 5 days, or it's 5 days if left blank. I always have people put it in just so everybody's clear. So we're good there. That's going to be the same day as that day. Property inspections we need to have done by 6/1 because we have 10 days to do those inspections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10th day. So we nailed that. That's exactly right. Insurance applied for, really, I may change this. We want an insurance quote to make sure that it's insurable and how much the insurance is. We want to do that in the first 10-day inspection period. It's a safe thing to do. Here's where things get crappy and dicey. When we do a home inspection, we have 10 days to do that inspection. I'm a big fan of doing it at like the 3rd or 4th or 5th day if I can. That way, if something pops up on the inspection where I need to have a specialist look at it, for example, a roof, the home inspector says, hey, this roof appears to be 17 years old. It's got some nail pops. Some of the shingles are turned up on the corner and the granulars are weak on it. It may need a new roof. Depending on the home inspector, he may say it needs a new roof, or if it's a good one, what the home inspector will say is, I recommend consultation with a roofer. That's what I would prefer. But if we get our inspections done early and something like that pops up, I could call my roofer and say, give me the scoop on this. How long do you think this is going to last, give or take a little? So that's a nice thing to have. Now, the tough part is the way the contract is written. We only have, so from the day you make a request to the seller. So in that 10 days, if at the end of the 10 days, you're going to ask for repairs or ask for money, you have to have that request in by 9 p.m. on the 10th day. That's the latest. I have a tendency to want to use most of the time. So I'll turn it in on the 8th, 9th, or 10th day, even if I got the inspection on the 3rd, 4th, or 5th. Just to make sure nothing, why not use the time if you have it? In addition to that, from the minute you turn in the inspection and any kind of a request, you start a countdown. You have 7 days from that point to resolve how you're going to deal with that. So if you say, hey, there's a whole bunch of stuff on this home inspection, instead of asking the seller to fix those things, the buyer would like to request $1,000 be paid toward their closing cost and prepaid items. That would be an example. As soon as you send that inspection and ask for that request, whatever days you had left of that 10 days are gone, and it starts a new timeline. The new timeline is the buyer and seller have 7 days to negotiate whatever that request was. So I write it up as if it's 10 plus 7, but in reality, if you make that request on the 5th day, you just canceled the end of the 5 days from your inspection period and started the 7-day negotiation. You see what I mean? It's a pain in the ass. You generally won't run into a problem with it, but that's the truth of the matter. So on this one, we had loan approval by 6/22. Let's see what the contract says and see if we got this right. So we asked for 30 days for loan approval. So what we would have had to do was go in on the 21st and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So we would have it in theory until the 21st. And it looks like we might have had that slightly wrong. I think we have the,
You're on June and July.
Oh.
There's an extra day.
oh, it was back 1 month. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it came out to the 22nd. I highly recommend actually counting the days, because the issue you'll run into, and I don't think we have it in this, is what happens if a time period ends. Let's say we were supposed to have loan approval on the 25th. When do we actually have to have it by? The 27th. So if any time period ends on a weekend or one of the 10 federal holidays, it goes to the following actual business day. Title commitment, you don't have to worry a ton about, or survey. Generally, those are countbacks. So if the property is supposed to close on the 24th, those things are supposed to be done 10 days prior to closing. You're counting back from the 24th. And again, the first time you get a contract, you and I are going to complete this thing together. So it won't be a problem. And what you're going to do is you're going to take this and give it to the buyer. Here's the reason we created this and the reason that it works so effectively. If you don't hand this to the buyer, they don't pay any attention to these dates. All they pay attention to is the closing date. But if you don't turn in your binder by the 26th, you know what that means? So if the buyer doesn't turn in the binder on the 26th, let's say they turned it in on the 27th. In theory, your contract is gone and that binder is gone. The worst place to be is this. When you do that and the binder hasn't been turned in and it's the 28th. Do you know what that means? That means you're in trouble and they're in trouble. So here's the worst part about it. You're in trouble, you let the day go by. If you didn't cover your ass and say, we need it, we need it, we need it, we need it, and have evidence of that, then it can come back on you too. If you've done that and the buyer didn't do it, and then the buyer goes, oh, well, I just don't want to buy the property. Guess what happens to the binder that they haven't turned in? They're supposed to turn it in and give it over to the seller. Never happens, but it can happen. It's very rare, but if you give this critical date contract to close checklist to your buyers, you know what happens instead? They check all these things off as fast as they can. If you don't give it to them, you're fighting to get them to meet the dates. You're going to say, oh, you need to turn in your binder. What? Don't you remember the contract you signed that maybe you did or did not explain to them? Yeah, we need to have that done. So that's what that form is for. I have another form that I use internally from the download section. I don't know if I even put it up here yet. I probably didn't. Okay, I'll add it soon. It's not super important. You just need to organize the contact information for the people involved in the transaction. I'll actually go through the trouble of showing it to you. And I'll add it over to their, to our website soon. Come on, you can do it. Thank you. I'll move it over. Oh, I wonder if I took it off here too. Transaction contact sheet. You don't have to be too overwhelmingly crazy about this form, but you want to fill in what you can fairly simply. How much is the binder? Where is it being held? That way you don't forget to get it before the closing. Is it a mail away or not? You need to let a closing attorney know if it's an out-of-town seller, for example, or the buyers are going to be out of town at the point when you close. You need to let that attorney know. You'll have the buyer and seller name. As far as the contact info, you're only going to have the contact info for your side. Like if you have the buyer and you call the listing agent and say, I want the seller's home phone number and email, they're going to be like, no, you're not talking to my person. They won't understand why you're asking. No need to know that stuff because you're going to be communicating with yeah, you would just put their name in there so you know what's going on. That way, when you call the title company, you can say, this is between Smith and Johnson, this transaction. Buyer is Smith, Johnson is seller, because that's how they look it up to make sure they're doing their job. Buyer's agent and all their info, listing agent and all their info, the mortgage company and all their info, the closing attorney and all their info, the home inspection company and all their info, the wood destroying organisms company and all their info, and the homeowner's insurance info. If you put all that in one place, just makes it way simpler and more organized while you're doing the transaction. That's the only, that one is the, yeah, it's a contact, I call it a contact sheet. And then I'll move it in. I haven't even, it's, for people who are disorganized, it's a very, very valuable thing to have because you're going to be doing a bunch of communication with a bunch of different people. And it's nice to be able to go back to those people if you need anything in regards to your transaction. So I'm going to go through a couple of common problems and then some massively scary problems that you're going to run into during the time that you're involved here. So common problems. Most common problem to me is verbal communication. Here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to write an offer. Let's say that one that we were discussing or using as an example was not a multiple offer and they were going to submit 345. You submit that offer, 345 and 3% in closing costs. Most likely what's going to happen at that point is the listing agent is going to call you or email you and say, the seller, what I would say is I would say, hey, do they need closing costs? Should I negotiate? My people aren't going to accept this, but what I want to know is, do they need closing costs? Should they leave the closing cost in and negotiate the price? Or do they not need the closing cost? Should they lower or remove the closing cost and keep the price that the buyer is offering? So they might call and ask you a question like that. And you're going to say, oh no, they absolutely need the closing cost. And then they're going to say, okay, you offered 345 in closing cost. I'll go to my seller. They go to their seller, talk to their seller, and the seller says, well, if I'm going to pay their closing cost, I want 350. The agent calls you back and says, hey, we're good to go. If your buyers will pay 350, the sellers will pay their closing cost and we're good to go. You call your buyers and say, if the seller said, if we pay 350, they'll pay your closing cost and we're good to go. And your buyer will say, yes, we'll pay 350 if they'll pay 3% of our closing costs. This is not a time for a congratulations. So you call the seller up and you say, hey, yeah, they'll do they're going to take the 350 and the 3% in closing cost. Which one of us is going to make the changes to the contract? And the listing agent will say, hey, I'll make the changes to the contract. We'll get it signed and initialed and I'll send it back to you. So we're good to go. Here's where you'll screw up. You'll call your buyer and say, hey, they're going to make the adjustments to this contract. We're good to go. Congratulations, X, Y, and Z. Let's say that that's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And you don't hear anything. You don't get the contract back with any changes yet. You go to sleep at night thinking that you have a contract and your buyers went to sleep patting themselves on the back that they have a house. The next day, you call the listing agent or text them or email them and say, hey, I hadn't gotten that copy of the contract yet. Can you send that to me so I can get the buyer's initials on it? And they say, oh, unfortunately, we had another offer come in last night. So now we're in a multiple offer situation. We're asking for highest and best by 7 p.m. tonight. How are your buyers going to view you? And here's the shitty part. What you're going to do is blame it on the other side, even though it wasn't their fault. None of this means a frickin' thing until everything is signed, dated, fully executed, and delivered. No congratulations until that happens. No, nothing. In fact, it's a warning. So what you were supposed to do when they said, hey, we're going to make the adjustments and we'll send it back to you, is you would call your buyer and go, hey, they're going to make the adjustments and they're going to send it back to me. In theory, everything should be okay. But until we have this signed, sealed, and delivered, we don't have a contract. I do. Yeah, I would say, hey, I'm going to make all these changes. I'll have it to you shortly. But it doesn't mean they have to rush to sign it. If you just do that, they have 24 hours to sign it and return it anyway. So, you know, that's how the contract is. All back and forth is 24 hours. So verbal communications will get you into a spot, and then you'll start playing the blame game, blaming the other agent, blaming the sellers, blaming your buyers. Even if your buyers up their price and win the multiple offer, you're going to have a friggin' terrible time closing that, because the buyers are going to hate the sellers are going to hate the buyers, you're going to hate everybody, and the other agent is going to hate everybody, and it's going to be ugly every minute of that contract. Date of execution. I can't say this enough. Date of execution is when the last signature or initial is signed, dated, and delivered. And delivery counts as sending it through DocuSign or an email or any of those things. Going back to that verbal communications, what if the seller sent me an email that said, hey, we're good to go. We're going to make the changes on our side. We should have them back to you by, close of business tomorrow. If the listing agent sent you that email, it's still not signed. That email doesn't mean shit. Deadlines, you're not going to miss deadlines. You're going to push your person to hit those critical dates from the contract to close checklist. I generally don't use the checklist with the co-op agent. If I'm on the buy side, I don't fill that thing out and send it to the seller, because then the seller can play gotcha. You missed a date, I get your binder. We don't want that. Or the listing agent. On the other hand, if I'm the listing agent, I want to make sure that I and the buyer's agent both know the execution date. And I may, as the listing agent, make one of these and send it to the buyer's side so they're aware of all the dates. Sort of hold them to an account. First-time home buyers and first-time home sellers are always difficult, because to them and I get it, looks like a whole lot of money when you're buying a $351,000 house. It's a lot of money. It's a big investment. It's, whatever it is. But first-time dealers of those situations are generally hypercritical. Oof. Okay, so we're going to go into an example here. Let me do this real quick. Minor emergency. Go buy anytime. Okay. That way I can pretend like I don't see it for at least the next hour. So I'm going to go through an example of what happens with buyers and sellers. And you might get a kick out of this. Let me see if I have it in here. Yeah, I do. A series of emails. Okay. Okay, so I get a fully executed contract. This is how wonky things will go. Like I said, aspirational that it goes perfect and smooth. We can do everything we can. So I ask an agent, let me see if I have it in here. I'll have to skip back and forth a little bit to make this happen. Okay. So I go to the listing agent. I have the buyers. This is a multiple offer situation. The property had been under contract and fell out from under contract. And you don't know why on your side, why this happened. But then as soon as it goes back on the market, and this is common, multiple buyers show up and want to buy it. My buyers show up, they love the house, they want to buy it. So we win the multiple offer situation, and then it's time to do inspections. So that the day after us winning this contract on a multiple offer, I go to the listing agent and say, hey, I have inspections set for tomorrow morning. Just wanted to let you know, blah, 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 blah. The seller doesn't live in the house, it's vacant, but I'm calling her and saying, hey, I have inspections set for tomorrow morning, X, Y, and Z. And I get back from the listing agent, Patrick, the seller will make arrangement for the buyer's requested inspections tomorrow, but wished me to provide you the attached inspections from the previous buyer to which all, in capitals, requested repairs were completed. Please let me know if your buyer wishes to continue with their inspections tomorrow after review of the attached. Thank you. Couple of things. She's not allowed to give you those inspections because they're not hers. Those inspections are owned by the person who did the inspection, who paid the money to have that inspection done. Additionally, if you rely on those inspections, you're not covered by the home inspector's errors and omissions because you don't have a contract with that home inspector. So these inspections in my book are useless. So I know that I need to get an inspection, but I'm like, yeah, I just want to see how far she goes with this. So I go, of course, any chance there are receipts for the repairs? Sort of already know what's going to happen, but sellers can provide receipt, but not until tomorrow morning. He does not have the receipts at his office downtown. Would you like to postpone the inspection tomorrow morning? We'll be happy to accommodate either way, just attempting to save your buyer money since the inspections are only a few weeks old. I'd count on us for inspections tomorrow morning unless you hear differently from me. Always leery of using previous inspection. So then I go the next morning. So let me show you here's the inspection. Let me see. Inspection. Should say mess in front. Okay, mess. So this is the inspection for James and Maya Parks. These are not my people. These are the people that bailed the first time. So generally on an inspection, you'll just look at the summary. So these are the summary pages from it. And it has in here what the major and minor conditions, an outline. And it shows all these minor conditions. So this is the inspection from the first people with pictures showing, gap here, this isn't done, that's not done. This is dangerous. This is the AC pad, it's not leveled. The hot water heater isn't piped outside if the pressure gets too high. Yeah, typical stuff you'll find on an inspection. So I go in and I'm like, okay, so, you know, I have that. And I was like, well, we're getting an inspection. We're getting an inspection. No big deal. She also at this point had sent me the WDO report from that initial inspection. And she sent me the repair request from that initial inspection that she said all this stuff is done. Remember, all capitalized? And the things that are in there, you know, bunch of wood decay. Need the irrigation pump power sourced from HVAC, external unit disconnect, level the HVAC, move it away from the tree. All these things are listed on here. And she sent me the inspection, this request, none of which I did. These are from the prior buyers, and the WDO sends me all the stuff. I knew that I could handle it. So I went ahead to my people. I'm an open book with my people. Okay, so I went through and told my people, and I sent them that inspection and all that stuff. So here's where it gets interesting. We go and get our own home inspection. Here we go. That's their WDO. Let me see about their inspection. It's in here. Might take a second. I wonder if they didn't put it in there. So you can guess what happened next. Ah, here it is. Here's the home inspection for my people, the Millers. Lo and behold, exact same, different inspector pointing out the same things. Boom. Remember the pictures from the other one? Gutter's not done, no spigot, nothing there. There's the WDO that was there. There's where they're showing that those things, you know, you saw in the other one, they had the guy pulling the picture out with his finger. The gaps, broken door. All these things that she said were completed. This is the one, these are the kickers that pop up in here. Let's see where it is outside. Boom, exact same thing here that was noted on the first one, not repaired. Same thing here, not repaired. Same thing here, not vented outside, not repaired, not repaired, not repaired. Same thing with the well system, not repaired. Shutoffs, not repaired. And then the end all be all, like, it couldn't be more obvious than not even touched. Pad still on level. Not one thing was done. So if I would have stuck to and said, we don't need inspections, we'll just do this and all this has been done, all that is on me. 100% would have been on me, because I would have advised them not to get an inspection. So then it goes to here. I go to her. So they'll make arrangements. So this is June 8th. The next day I go to her, or the day and a half after them. And I go, Teresa, just wanted to get you a copy of the inspection report from Crystal Cove. So I'm trying to be nice. Not sure if there was some kind of miscommunication, but when you sent me the email below, it said that all of the repairs had been completed, but based on the attached inspections from Tuesday, none of the repairs from the previous inspection repair requests had been addressed. Not sure, so I'm trying to let people off the hook and be nice. Not sure if the seller or the workman that did the work told you that they were completed, but if you could look into it, I would greatly appreciate it. I forwarded your email below to the current buyers based on the email. Their expectation was that these things were completed, which it would be if she did what she did. Honestly, I'm in the process of doing a little bit of damage control, and then I'll handle it. Don't see it as a deal breaker, but needless to say, there's a little bit of work to be done. I'm traveling to Atlanta today. I'll call you in a bit to discuss. So I brought this up in here before. Have you ever watched Will and Grace? You know, when Jack freaks out and starts squealing really high and freaking out and screaming and all that? That's what I got for being nice. So from her, I get the seller had the AC pad leveled. I'm looking at it. And the remaining items were scheduled to be repaired when the previous buyer walked away and forfeited deposit. Seller canceled the repairs, but is rescheduled based on the previous report. There's no malicious intent here or hidden agenda by seller. I'm concerned, so she's gonna try to turn it around on me, just so you know. I'm concerned that the buyers appear to be very skeptical and unsure of consummation of this purchase based on their previous experience with a condo that they sold in the past. I appreciate the fact that there was a miscommunication. However, the seller is very vested in selling the property and to move on to this new purchase with fair and reasonable intent to the buyer. Seller is also concerned after previous buyer walked away with no reason. Looks to me like they had a friggin' reason. They didn't. She's given me a load of shit. Because I know at this point that the reason that it fell apart before is they didn't do the repairs and they said they would. I already know this, but I'm trying to be diplomatic. Because it says sellers, they walked away 7 days before closing. Those repairs would have had to been done at that point. Like I can do a contract to close and please provide me in writing the buyer's expectation are at this juncture, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, be nice. Be nice. There's no reason not to be nice. It's time to be nice. So I go to her and say, Teresa, got it. Thanks for the clarification. I figured it was just a misunderstanding, miscommunication. I know I can convey your message to the buyer and they'll understand. I think everything will work out fine since we have, remember me saying it, a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell. I'll get with them and get you something in writing. Thank you very much for your time and efforts. I'll be in touch. I'm way early on my inspection window. I'm way early on everything like I always am. Super sweet to her. And look, again, in return. Next morning, first thing, seller is requesting an update on inspection results. Please advise your buyer's position on repairs requested. And I hadn't asked for anything. And I have a week to ask. I have no, like, I'm way ahead of schedule and I'm being nice. And, you know, she started badgering me the next morning. I was like, and I'm on vacation, by the way. Like, Teresa, I've been in communication with the buyer. So most likely only going to ask, request a clean WDO. And the reason that we're doing that is they had to have a clean WDO because it was a VA mortgage. And that we didn't trust those people to do the repairs or to do them properly anyway. So why the frig ask? And I told my people that from day one that this is most likely as is because it was multiple offer. I will not be in a place to put everything in writing and get signatures until tomorrow, which is well within the dates of the contract. I'll be in touch. So I'm reminding her, quit frickin' badgering me. She finally, thank you. So all this seems well and good. So we ended up just asking for the WDO, so we let them off the hook on that. I was nice all the way through all this stuff. The reason that I'm nice, that I'm not yelling at her or playing gotcha or screwing with her, is because on every transaction, there's going to be a spot where I get in trouble or where my side is in a less than good position. Lo and behold, that happens. No problem of mine. But if you remember, she referenced the condo. these people foreclosed on a condo 7 years previously. They were trying to do an FHA loan. If you had a foreclosure in the previous 7 years, you couldn't do an FHA loan. Their actual foreclosure sale on the steps was 7 years and 2 months prior to this point. But that's not the date that the banks use. They use the date of when the deed gets recorded, which was 4 months later. So now my people no longer qualify for an FHA mortgage. So this is very possibly dead. I talked to the lender and said, hey, look, you're telling me that they can't do FHA. What can they do? He comes up with a conventional program, but they don't have the money down to close on it. So now I have to call the other side and go, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. We had this set up for FHA. It was all pre-approved, all this stuff. We're going through the process. And as it turns out, they no longer qualify for FHA because the deed from their foreclosure has only aged 6 years and 8 months, not the 7 years required. She starts screaming at me instantly.
Oh.
So I let her scream for a little while. And then I said, well, I eventually cut her off. I said, do you want to scream, or do you want to hear the solution to our mutual issue here? So I was like, here's what we're going to do. I spoke with the lender. They're going to make a switch. They're going to switch from FHA to conventional. But here's where we need help from you and the seller. They're not going to have the closing costs anymore. So what we want to do, since we haven't done the appraisal yet, is we want to raise the purchase price by $5,000 and have the seller pay $5,000 of the buyer's closing cost and prepaids. We'll have this thing closed in no time flat. And she's screaming and yelling about this stuff. And I was just like, all right, here's what I need you to do. I need you to shut your trap for a minute. Do you want to close? Do we still have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell, or not? Call me back in 15 minutes and let me know. And I hung up on her, which I never do this. But I can't talk to her. I'm like, all right, I thought I could talk to you, but I can't talk to you. You're rambling on. I was like, do we have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell? I have a solution. I've presented it to you. She calls me back, much calmer. I probably said some bad words at some point, when she was screaming and yelling. I was just like, stop, 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 stop. I may have put some emphasis on a few words to stop her from going on and on. So I solved the problem. So I get this. Patrick, thank you for your call today. This is the response I got after I lit her up and said, do we have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell? I understand the frustration with this type of situation, and please know that the seller is on board to sign the amendment needed by buyers changing from conventional to FHA financing. You addressed any concerns I have, and I appreciate your candor. Candor was brittle words said. I have spoken with Travis, he's the lender, who has assured me that he feels confident after this change, things will move smoothly toward closing. I've also spoken with the appraisal, and the appraisal for tomorrow has been canceled. Travis advised that you are preparing the amendment for buyer's signature since both of them were off work today and were able to sign. Please forward the amendment to me as soon as possible so that I may have sellers sign first thing tomorrow morning and send to Travis. Maybe appraisal can be performed first of the week. Seller is diligently working to have the WDO repairs completed. Is concerned because the inspector has noted siding that is new hardy board. She's great at throwing problems without solutions. A new hardy board siding, which, as you and I know, is cement wall. I'll reach out to the inspector tomorrow and arrange for inspector to meet with seller's GC for clarification. Thank you again. I look forward to receiving it. So everything goes smooth from there. If I would have been an asshole to her with all that inspection stuff at the beginning, I would have never got our problem solved when we had a problem on our side. The majority of agents don't do what I did there. They'll create a buyer that wants to buy, a seller that wants to sell. I don't care about your emotional baloney. Don't screech at me like Just Jack. I don't care about any of that stuff. I have a solution. Are you okay with the solution or not? Do we still have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell? Once I calmed her down and put that out there, I get this as a response. Everything went fine. We closed a week late. So that's all I turned in for a repair agreement, was the asking for a clear WDO. I didn't ask for any of the other stuff because it was such a mess. And you can see we had to change the price. So we had to raise it, and then the seller contribute 3%. So we just tacked it on, and luckily we caught knowledge and made all this happen before they went out and did the appraisal. Because if they did just so you know, appraisals generally come in at or pretty darn close to the price of the contract. So if we would have turned in our original contract at 235 or whatever, the appraisal would have come in at 235 and this wouldn't have worked. So the moral to the story is be nice until you absolutely can't be nice anymore. Sometimes you do have to get a little chippy, but don't be the instigator of chippiness ever. Don't let pride get in the way. Because people giving you a hard time, pride, there's a movie, has anybody ever watched Pulp Fiction?
Yes.
There's a part in that where he's talking to Marcellus Wallace. He says, pride never helps, it only hurts, when he's trying to convince the boxer to take a dive. So just to recap this thing, never use previous inspections. Always do your own inspections. Never take the word of another agent. By the way, when this lady's yelling at me, she was a paralegal for an attorney in a previous life. So somebody who's a paralegal tried to pull all this baloney on me. So just keep in mind what the seller and buyer's perspective are throughout the transaction. You got two sides to everything. So some of the common problems you'll run into with agents, and most of the time, the biggest problem you'll see is undereducated. So they just generally don't know what they're doing. Then you'll run into people like this lady that I dealt with that are bullies or combative. Everything's combative. So they'll bring you problems, but never bring you a solution. They just bring the problem part of it. Many agents are lazy. What I don't want you to do is get caught up in trying to make one of them, whoever's on the other side, do their job. Just do it for them. It's all about your customer's experience. Do everything you can to make your customer's experience good, regardless of whether it's more time, effort, or anything else on your part. Additionally, it allows you to take control. So there's a lot of benefits to taking as much in a transaction on as you're allowed. And don't bring issues without solutions. I hate that. I always think about that episode of Seinfeld where they have their holiday Festivus, you know, the reading of the grievances and all that stuff. It's a funny episode if you've never seen it, but that's what I get is reading of grievances. Our whole world runs on a reading of grievances. This person's under everybody's thumb. Here's the grievance, here's the grievance, here's the grievance, here's the grievance. You get tons of grievances. You don't get any solutions to any of these. You just get complaints. Don't do that. Don't be that person. The lender. So the communication one, you're a mushroom. You guys have heard me say it before. If it's an out-of-town lender, an internet lender, or a couple other winners, a credit union, Local credit union will do this to you. In all those cases, they're going to treat you like a mushroom. You grow really good mushrooms by feeding them poop and keeping them in the dark. And that's what most lenders are going to do to you. That's why I always push for, let's use a good local lender. You know, it can be Bank of England, it can be somebody else. Build a relationship with somebody that you're beholden to and they're beholden to you. How are they beholden to you? If they do this transaction and they do a good job, their hope and expectation is that you'll send them more and more and more. If you send them more and more and more, they're going to do anything they can to keep you as the agent happy. So like the Bank of England people, they look at the buyer as their customer, and they look at you as their customer. That's way different from an online lender who's like, oh, it didn't work out. Sorry about that. And they just disappear because they're just some entity out there in the world. The appraisal switcheroo comes up sometimes. We're going to run into that here. And when I say here, I mean in the market that we're in, where it's a heavy, heavy buyer or a heavy, heavy seller's market. You're going to run into cases where your buyer wins a multiple offer and then the house doesn't appraise. One of the solutions, that's how we met Bank of England way back in the day, was that you have to switch from one lender to another. What that does is triggers a new appraisal. Because if you send 3 appraisers out, guess how many different numbers you're going to get? 3. We went through the Crystal Cove Lane to where, you know, this lender actually is awesome and did a great job, but just a circumstantial thing bit him in the ass and bit me as well, and then bit the whole transaction. So sometimes you'll have to be flexible with that. And this is what I always tell people, turn negatives into positives. Our reaction to a situation literally has the power to change the situation itself. So if you freak out, you can make that happen to your entire transaction. If you get mad, you can make everybody in your transaction mad. If you're helpful and organized, you can turn that transaction into a helpful, organized transaction, create that environment. That's my recommendation. So out of all that stuff we went over, does anybody have any questions about anything we saw there? Yes, ma'am. Certificate of occupancy. So let me ask, just for the people online, what if there's a certificate of occupancy? Is that on new construction or a house being redone?
An existing house, let's say either the CO wasn't closed out, the town, or
It'll end up having to be closed out.
that, and then how does that, sometimes I know I've had experience where it's delayed everything.
It can. Like in transactions, there's a million things that can delay a transaction. So CO is a certificate of occupancy. A couple of examples. On new construction, they need to get final inspections and all that stuff done in order to issue a certificate of occupancy. Most transactions, like if it's not most resale transactions, you won't run into it. But until that is obtained, you can't get a mortgage. So you have to go through whatever. I'm guessing that happened in New York. That seems
a lot in New York.
Yeah, and that would be common because they have massive amounts of regulation. So, you know, they just create extra hurdles. And then with those extra hurdles, somebody will miss one of the hurdles and then you go back to fix it. And that's a good way to get a couple extra dollars out of, because I'm sure it didn't happen free. Yeah, it never happens free. So that's the wheels, wheels working for you. Any other questions? Like I had to do a certificate of occupancy. I redid a house that I moved into, but I had to sort of massage the wheels to make sure it was in Neptune Beach to get the guy to come out quick to do the certificate of occupancy, because I had to have a second mortgage to pay the contractor who did all the work. So it's a chicken or the egg thing. So you just have to go sweet talk people to rarely happen to anybody here. It's very uncommon here.
Is there a statistic on contract close, like actually getting on time?
There's not,
25%?
I think on time, I would say is about maybe 50-50, 40-50% that it closes on time. It's very, very, very much it's generally dependent upon a lender. The lender is the one, so I had a discussion with one of the agents in the program who has a closing set for the 29th of this month. Her contract has the lender approval on the 22nd, and then a week later on the 29th at closing. Here's what constantly happens in your transaction, and there's no way to get out of this, just so you know. So the lender in that one is Quicken, not really beholden to you, also not here local in Florida, so they don't necessarily know your contract. All they do, they ignore all your contract to close dates. They don't care about any of those. You know the date they care about? Only one. Closing date. The date they get paid is all they care about. So she has a contract that's written that the buyer will be approved on the 22nd. That's likely not going to happen. So the question becomes, do you do an extension for that, or you don't do an extension for that? 99% of the time that's not done here locally. You call the lender, engage, and find out if everything is pretty much done, other than, like a checkbox checked. Like this, the only thing outstanding on the buyer is verification of employment. In other words, do they still have the job they had when they made application? So if they can do that within the last 10 days, then it automatically becomes approved. There's no real reason to get an extension there. Yeah, so that they just, all the mortgage person cares about is the closing date. But that can put you in a bad spot, and it will almost 100% of the time, to where you're having to take little gambles along the way. Because her buyer asked for repairs to be done. The listing agent and seller side, the seller side doesn't have to do those repairs until the buyer is fully approved. But the buyer's not fully approved. So yeah, so you'll run in, your dates often will not match up precisely.
And they pick
The bank does, because the appraisal is only for the bank. It's not for the buyer. I mean, the buyer will see it. It's presented as if it's for the buyer, but it's not anything. It's no benefit to the buyer. It's really for the bank to feel comfortable that of the amount of money that they're loaning on this property. If they have to take it back, they're comfortable with it. For the most part, that's what it is. One of the things that you'll see, just as an example, between big banks, online banks, and non-local banks particularly, is they have, for the appraisal process, this is a prime example of why we use Bank of England. When you make a mortgage application, they'll have either, banks will call it either an application fee or an appraisal fee. They're both the same thing. So when you make application, you're essentially cutting them a $500 check so that they can do the appraisal. Here's what big banks do with that. Wells Fargo is one that does this. They collect the $500 from your buyer. Then they have a portal where they have a reverse auction. So what the reverse auction does, I don't know if he explained this to you last week. Yeah, so what the reverse auction does is they say, hey, appraisers out here in our pool, who wants this appraisal? And they'll say, oh, I'll do it for $450. And the next appraiser will say, I'll do it for $400. And the next one will say, I'll do it for $375. And then somebody will say $325. Then they'll knock it all the way down to it's $175 for this appraisal. What happens then is that appraiser is doing an appraisal for a small amount of money. That means he has to do a big volume, he or she has to do a big volume of appraisal. So they go in and bid low on a whole bunch of ones in that area. What happens to us is we'll get somebody from in between here and Tallahassee that'll bid and get one at the beach. Then they take 4 or 5 other ones at the beach to make it worth the trip for them to drive over here, measure the house, take the pictures, do all the stuff, and then they go home and do the appraisals. They don't do any real research. This is a volume game. They do them as fast as they freaking can. They don't look at the details. They're not familiar with our beaches and our market here. And they just do a cursory whatever. They put it all together and they submit that. And then lo and behold, you know, they didn't hit the value very well. They screwed it up and it didn't appraise. You're in a bad spot then. The bank that hired them is not in a bad spot, and they're not, that appraiser is not in a bad spot. The appraiser got the 175 they intended to get. The bank got $500, gave away 175 and kept 325, turned the appraisal into a profit center, so they win. The only person that gets screwed is your buyer. So like Bank of England has about a dozen local appraisers. And that's all it is. They know the market, they know everything, and they're going to have they all live here. So they're all going to have an optimistic view of the market. And they also know the details that you need to know to get the value right. As soon as you step outside that, all kinds of things can go wrong. Just one example of the difference. And people don't know they gave $500,000 to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo gave out $150 and kept $350 in their pocket. And then they sell their services to other banks. So then their service and system is a big, gigantic profit center. Very unpleasant, but that all happened in 2010 to 2012 with the Frank Dodd Act. I love those guys. And when you hear the attorney bitch about TRID and all that, those guys stuffed us with regulations that they presented as helping the little man that really only got on board with the big banks again and justified all this stuff. Same thing. They're not going to talk to you. So Bank of England would, and most of your local lenders will treat you as a customer and the buyer as a customer. The credit union will treat their customer as a customer and treat you as a pain in the ass, asking for information and holding them to account. And they'll use those TRID guidelines and all that stuff to keep you in the dark. So they're not the preferred way to go, but you'll find tons of people that are, beholden. Like as soon as I say credit union, people go, I love my credit union. You're probably not turning back that clock, but you can give them the warning of, I'm going to need you to do some of this work. Because if I call as the buyer's agent and say, I need an update and what can I do and blah, 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 they're not going to give me much of anything. I have to give my buyer the right questions to ask to see if we're on track. And then the buyer has to ask them and then they have to relay it back to me, and it just makes things tough. Sometimes they'll work with you and be friendly to you. Other times they won't. Oh, well, it's easy. Well, also they're fine with you because you're the buyer, you're their customer. They generally don't treat your agent very well. It's just luck of the draw whether they do a good job or not. Yep. Any other questions? Okay, you guys are golden. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I will see you on Thursday. And then is there a class on Wednesday? I think there is. Which one is it? Just
And so that one's Zoom only tomorrow, right? Not in person.
on Wednesday?
The other one tomorrow, Tuesday, on the board.
Oh, that's not me. So I don't know anything much about that. Okay, she'll show you how to use some of the stuff that's in Command that you have access to. I'm looking to do something that I think will be helpful to everybody. I don't know if it's going to be this Friday or the following Friday. I'm working with them. It's called Do Your Job Friday, DYJ Friday. instead of doing one-to-ones or group coaching on Fridays, we're going to come in here and actually do the stuff that's on your marketing calendar. If we need to create a postcard, we can make that happen on that day. If we need to write handwritten notes, we can make that happen. If we have the item of value flyer, we can make that happen. If we have an email, we make that happen. I see that Thomas actually did his job. That's extremely rare by turning in his handwritten notes, but we're gonna, yeah, doing it all together sort of makes it so that you can hear other ideas, but it also is shared pain. Because we don't like it either. My wife, as soon as I said, we're going to do your job Fridays, you know, the first week we'll do the mailer. The second week we'll do the just listed, just sold. The third week we'll do, she's like, I'm in, I'm going every single time. Because it's a pain in the ass for us, just like it is for you guys. And nobody actually, as far as I can tell, very few people actually do their job on that. So proud of you for doing that. And we'll keep that up and it'll pay dividends for you, that I'm sure. All right, guys, thank you very much for your time today. And I will talk to you on Thursday.